Welcome, everybody, to the March 9th L'Dor Va-Dor Chat with Two Rabbis. Thank you all for joining us. This weekly program is a very exciting discussion about Torah and more, anything Jewish and whatever else comes up. I'd like to introduce Rabbi Barry Silver, of course, our spiritual leader with L'Dor Va-Dor, and our guest, Orthodox rabbi and educator, Rabbi Zvi Kahn. I see that Rabbi Kahn has his family here tonight. We've already talked to his daughter, his beautiful daughter, Rena, in New York. And I believe your parents are on, Carol and Saul. So thank you all to the Kahn family for allowing Rabbi Zvi to be with us each week and for supporting us and being part of this wonderful discussion. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Rabbi Barry Silver to start. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for making this all possible. And I do want to thank Rabbi Kahn for being with us. We always have some great discussions. And he wanted me to clarify that he is not the rabbi of Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor. I think he wanted me to clarify that to protect his reputation. Because our congregation is a little bit different. He wanted to make sure I don't really have anything to do with these guys. I'm just here on a Tuesday night sharing some points of view and trying to straighten them out. So it's not, this isn't my gig. But I do want to clarify that as far as I'm concerned, Rabbi Kahn and I are co-hosts of this program, and neither one of us overshadows the other. We're both equal in hosting this program. But don't get him mixed up with some of the crazy ideas that you'll hear coming out of Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor. It's also a great tribute to Rabbi Kahn that his family is here with him. And you've done a great job picking parents. Your parents are wonderful, and your daughter. And I wish I had my family here. They're off playing basketball with Brandon. He doesn't take after me too much, but he does play basketball religiously. I can say that. Like every night he's out playing somewhere, which is okay. This is a great passage that we have that I want. We always have Rabbi Kahn share a little bit about the passage, and then I offer some views, and then we talk about what's going on in the world and anything else that's on your mind. So Rabbi Kahn, take it away. Tell us what you think about the Torah reading for this Shabbat.
Thank you so much. Couple things. Before I clarify, I have to issue a clarification, but before I do that, my son Shmuel is actually on for the first time. He's back from Israel, but he has to lean over. There he is. Shmuel, can you just wait?
Oh, Shmuel. Hey, how you doing?
So we've got with my mom, of course, but my mom is a veteran. She of the session. She's been on a few times, and as has my daughter Rena. But this is Shmuel's first time.
Rabbi Kahn, you got a lot of support there going to back you up on this.
I'm going to need it. I can feel.
You got You got three different generations coming at us. This is great.
The clarification that's actually very important is that I certainly never said that I didn't want to be affiliated with the group. I love the group. I love being part of the L'Dor Va-Dor weekly sessions. I just thought it was important for Sharon in her introduction to make it clear that Rabbi Silver is, of course, the spiritual leader, and I'm a guest rabbi. And the reason I did that is because I've had different relatives come on, and one or two of them got confused about exactly how the setup was, and I thought that wasn't. I really didn't think that was fair to Rabbi Silver. But anyway, thank you for the clarification, and I appreciate it.
And I don't want you tossed out of various Orthodox organizations for being too closely
so
connected.
So far, I'm in good standing. It's good. It's good. I'm okay.
That's good. Okay.
And if anybody were to ask me about it, I'd say when Jews get together to talk about the Torah portion of the week, nothing can be bad about that. It's got to be good. It can't be bad, no matter how you slice it. This week's Torah portion, as the rabbi mentioned, is called Vayakel Pekude, which means it's a double Torah portion, which happens throughout the year once in a while. It means we get two Torah portions for the price of one. As it turns out, these two Torah portions fit nicely together because they kind of bring to a close the discussions of the tabernacle, which we started several weeks ago. In Hebrew, the word is Mishkan, a dwelling place for God amongst the Jewish people, in the middle of the Jewish people. And the tabernacle was a portable picture kind of a portable synagogue, you might say, that they could actually wrap up and carry to the next camping location and then set it up again. But it was very beautiful, and it wasn't something that you'd picture as just a temporary kind of campsite. It was a beautiful structure, and a lot of details have been given to us over the last few weeks. One of the points I want to make that I think is so interesting is that right in the beginning of this week's of the first of the two Torah portions, Vayakhel, the Torah says, make sure that when you're working on this tabernacle and this Mishkan, and you're working so hard to build it to exact specifications and to make it so beautiful and so glorious as a home, so to speak, or a dwelling place for God's presence, do not do any of that work on the Sabbath. And that's really interesting to think about for a moment, because one might have thought that the Torah would say this work, this holy work, is so important that it supersedes the Sabbath, and you should do this work. You could refrain from your occupation or from other work on the Sabbath, but this is holy work. This is the most sacred work people could ever be involved in, and this kind of work should continue on the Sabbath. But the Torah does not say that. It says just the opposite. It says this is holy, sacred work, but do not participate in this kind of work and these labors on the Sabbath. And it seems to me that what's being one of the ideas that that the Torah might be communicating here is that the Sabbath is an essential part of our relationship with God. And the temple is as important as it is and as sacred as it is, it's a structure, it's an edifice, it's a building. And the Torah is saying, God is teaching us, the Torah is teaching us, God is teaching us that no matter how important, how beautiful, how magnificent, how holy structures and buildings are, that is not the key of Judaism. That is not the central or essential point. The essential point of Judaism is building a relationship with God. And that's what the Sabbath is all about. That's what the Sabbath celebrates. On the other,
Rabbi Kahn, you mean that the Jews don't have an edifice complex? Is that what you're saying?
You'd have to ask Sigmund Freud about that. I'm not positive about that. But I think it's a wonderful, really inspiring, thought-provoking point that kind of jumps out at us right in the beginning of this week's Torah portion.
Oh, well, thank you. That is a very interesting observation. And I would like to get your comment on the fact that a lot of times I do weddings and Orthodox members of the family don't show up because they can't drive. It's like on a Saturday night or something like that, and they can't drive. And I'm thinking, what rule would supersede being with your family on a wedding? And I was always curious about the rationale for not driving. Maybe you could share that with me, because I've always been told it's because you can't create a fire. But a fire used to require a lot of work in the old days. Now it doesn't. And cars don't work by creating a fire anyway. So it's a little more sophisticated than that. So I was just kind of curious. Maybe you can answer that one. But I did want to comment on this passage, because this passage to me is really, it's a miracle. You know, the Torah has lots of miracles in it. And as a rational thinker, I don't really buy all the miracles. But this one is probably the one that's hardest to believe of all. We saw a miracle a few passages back where Moses gets advice from his father-in-law, and he actually listens and he follows his father-in-law's advice, which is really quite miraculous, especially since he talks to God face to face. Like, what does he need with a non-Jewish priest? And then we see another miracle where Moses is told by God that God's going to wipe out the Jewish people and start over with him. And Moses challenges God and says, no, you can't do that. And Moses has the chutzpah to say, forget about it. That's not your thing. You don't go around wiping people out. And then God changes his mind, which is pretty miraculous. But this passage, I think, is the most miraculous of all, because Moses says, hey, I need some donations here. I need donations for the tabernacle. And the Jews give so much that Moses has to say, okay, genug, bastante. They must speak. And he says, I have enough. And they gave too much. And they had to tell the people, stop giving already. We're good to go. So this is quite miraculous. Also, the passage shows, Rabbi Khan, that even though we might not be quite as traditional as others, we are following the very traditional Jewish pattern of being wandering Jews. We have a portable sanctuary now too. We don't have a building anymore, so we're just like wandering around from one park to the next, and we're following the tradition of Moses in the desert. So I guess that makes us pretty traditional. Of course, we're looking around for our promised land, and we hope to find a place when the pandemic ends. But right now, we're just wandering Jews. But I also like to think, because we care about science and reason, we're also wondering Jews. We still have our sense of wonder about us, and we don't believe that everything is fixed. And we believe that we're still exploring and learning new things all the time. So I'll turn it back over to you, Rabbi Khan. Maybe you could share with me the basis for not driving on the Sabbath and why that would supersede people being with their family on at a wedding.
It's really, first of all, thank you for the point. Before I get to that, thank you for the point you made about the incident in which Moses said exactly what you said. Moses says, that's enough, stop. I'm telling you, please don't bring any more, which is incredible when you think about it. But it reflects, as you alluded to, it reflects the fact that in Jewish tradition, going back all the way to you might say, the beginning, the roots of our people, Jews have been incredibly generous, giving, charitable people, and that continues to be a quality. The Talmud actually says, if you're not sure if someone's Jewish, but there are three things that you can look at to kind of tell, three qualities, and one of those qualities is this a charitable person? Is this a giving person and a compassionate person? It's that rooted, so to speak, in our DNA as Jewish people, and it's a beautiful thing. And this is an excellent, amazing illustration of it, that the people were so giving and involved in the process of donating to the tabernacle that they had to be forcibly stopped. So I love that point from the Torah portion.
Rabbi Khan, it also shows that there are many people who have Jewish parents, but they're not living a Jewish life. In other words, they were born Jewish, but they're not charitable. And you can tell they don't really have a Jewish neshama. This is very sad. I agree with you. The Jewish people love to give, and they find out that when they give, they actually get so much more. When you're part of a holy cause and you're donating to something that has such significance and such worth, it's really a great feeling. And sadly, there are many Jews who don't really know that feeling anymore. At L'Dor Va-Dor, we haven't had that problem yet, where we had to say, okay, stop giving already, we got enough. Hasn't happened yet at L'Dor Va-Dor, but you never know. But it is sad that a lot of people are thinking just about themselves, and they don't really get the experience of what it means to be part of something bigger than themselves and to give back. And this passage shows, like you say, that that's really integral to being Jewish.
Yeah, and we have to, I think, always be, and as I know you are, we have to always be optimistic when we see Jews, sometimes lots of Jews, maybe a tremendous percentage, not carrying on a certain tradition or not carrying on a certain value that's so rooted in part and parcel of Judaism, so integral to Judaism. We have to realize, okay, we've come a long way, and a lot of values and concepts and traditions have been dropped by people or lost along the way, but we have to be hopeful and optimistic that they'll bring it back. And I know you've experienced the same thing I have, that sometimes people who we maybe knew in the past as being tight-fisted, sometimes the right cause or the right approach, or they have a certain experience in their life, brings them to be much more giving and charitable. And as I think we have to take this assumption that all Jews deep inside have that giving heart and that compassionate, charitable feeling. But sometimes you have to go through a lot of layers to get there before you see it. So,
well, Rabbi Khan, I think that proves your Jewish credentials, because someone who's truly Jewish believes that everybody has goodness inside of them and has the capacity to return. And so I think your kindness of spirit towards other people is really what it means to be Jewish. There are many people who don't share that point of view. There's many people who say, you can't change anybody, people don't change, and they're very cynical about it. And this guy's a no good Nick or whatever. But your position is exactly what Judaism believes, that we shouldn't give up on people. And I've seen that many times, and you have too. And by the way, it's not just giving monetarily. The people that did the most giving in this passage were Bezalel and Holiab, who gave of their talent. They were skilled artisans, and they were able to fashion all the donations. So they didn't give anything monetarily. They gave of themselves and of their talents. And everybody has the ability to give, even if somebody's watching this and they decide to send it to a few people they know and spread the word about what we're doing. That's a way of giving it. It does not have to be based on money. If you're sitting around with lots of money, more than you know what to do with, and you want to make a donation, that's good. But if you got some time and you can donate time, that's good. Or if you can call a friend and share something with them, it's all good. Everybody has things that they can donate, and that's the main point, that everybody should give what they're able to give.
Beautiful. Just to go back now to your question. So
yes.
what's really, I think, fascinating about your question, Rabbi Silver, is that you asked about driving a car and how did that become prohibited on the Sabbath? It actually connects directly to the very first point we discussed. When the Torah says that the tabernacle, the work of the tabernacle, the labor done in the tabernacle, involved in the tabernacle, should not be done on the Sabbath, that means that was used as a blueprint or a source for the type of work that shouldn't be done on the Sabbath, not just at that time, so many thousands of years ago, but for all time. So the way that developed is that a list, it starts actually with a specific list of 39 specific labors that were done to construct the tabernacle. And those labors were the kind of categories, are prime categories of prohibited work. In Hebrew, we call it melacha, that's forbidden on the Sabbath. And as you said, also, one of those labors was lighting a fire, to burn a fire or to kindle a fire, and an automobile, correct me if I'm wrong, but even today has to have a combustion, has to have the gasoline be burned in some way. Now, certainly earlier on, maybe there was a direct application of fire, and now maybe it's just a spark or an injection or something like that. But the idea of not driving a car, of the prohibition of not driving a car on the Sabbath, is that it violates the prohibition of combustion or burning or kindling on the Sabbath. Now, the second part of your question is a very—
well, hold on. Let's start out on that part before you go too far. I believe the Hebrew they use is ish, like ish ha-tohah. You know, you can't make a fire. I think you would agree that there's no fire inside of a car. They're not like rubbing sticks together and making a fire. And in the electric cars, electricity isn't a fire at all. It's just it's electrical energy. There's no fire involved in it. And I understand that if you go back to halacha and tradition, there's like you're right, you say 39 things, and they by extension, but aren't the Orthodox capable of using reason and common sense and just say, yeah, I know, like hundreds of years ago, they thought building a fire was work because it was a lot of work to build a fire. Now today, even a fire, you just strike a match. That's not work. So the reasoning behind it seems to me lost. The reasoning is you shouldn't do labor, but lighting a match isn't, even if you make a fire, it's not labor, and a car doesn't work by a fire. But why is it that nobody can just come along and say, hey guys, you know what? This isn't really a fire. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. So let's go ahead and go to that wedding. You know, like, it seems like that would transcend the hunt. I mean, in the Torah, obviously there were no cars. So you kind of have to update things once in a while. It seems like sometimes it's not updated properly.
So a tremendous—
like what would happen if you were to drive a car? I mean, would you be violating your personal beliefs, or would you just be worried that other Orthodox people are going to look at you and say, hey, what's this guy doing? You know, he's breaking one of our rules.
I'm really big on not caring too much about what other people think, no matter—
That's good. So am I. That's why you're on this show. I know. That's why you're with me.
It wouldn't be based on what other people might think. It would be based, however, on what I truly believe is a violation of the Sabbath. And so I do not drive a car on the Sabbath. I do not use electricity. I do not use the telephone. There's all kinds of things that I don't do. And for me, and I think it's safe to speak for my family. They can speak up for themselves if they'd like to. It creates this kind of refraining from these activities, these what we again call these labors or these activities in a broad sense, creates a holy space in which there really is a feeling of connectivity with God, connectivity with family. Imagine for a moment if everybody 1 day a week in the world put down their cell phones, turned off their televisions, didn't drive all over the place, and said, let's spend time with family, let's sing, let's pray, let's eat nice meals. Let's do that. It's very enriching. It's very refreshing in a spiritual sense. And I think that's at the core of what the Sabbath is. Now, I get exactly your point, which is if technically something isn't prohibited, like you said, an electric car, well, those kinds of things are discussed in what we call the responsa literature and the halachic questions and answers that cover every imaginable type of topic. And you'd be amazed.
Even a Prius, they even discuss a Prius in the responsa.
Electric cars are in there, and whether or not you can use an electric car on the Sabbath is widely discussed and talked about, and there are different opinions about it and those kinds of things. But the general view, at least within Orthodoxy, is that traveling in a car, or for that matter, an airplane, a train, a bus, is not something that should be done on the Sabbath. Obviously, I realize that that's not the dominant view in the most of the world Jewish population, but that is the Orthodox tradition and the Orthodox kind of assumption. But all of the things that are prohibited today in 2021 in the Orthodox world on the Sabbath harken back and connect in some way to the original 39 categories of prohibited labor that were done in the tabernacle. So to me, I find that really, again, like I said, fascinating about that connection between work on the tabernacle stopping when the Sabbath came in, and we continue to do that, to observe that idea and that concept of not doing those labors and works and activities, and again, in a very broad, expanded sense, on the Sabbath.
Right. Now, those 39 things are not mentioned in the Torah, right? They're extrapolated from the Torah, but they're actually first articulated in the Talmud, right? In the Mishnah.
Correct. Some of them are mentioned. That there is a verse that says, do not burn a fire, do not light a fire. That's a verse in the Torah. A couple of the 39 are mentioned specifically in the Torah, not to harvest or reap, but most of the 39, you're correct, are mentioned in the Talmud and are listed in the Talmud and not mentioned in the Torah in an open way.
So yes. It seems like you guys are kind of like Reformed Jews, just kind of changing the Torah around and making up new rules after the Torah has been written. I don't mean to slander you, but seems like you're kind of like, and then you got the responsa that are making up other things. I'll tell you this. I have a great deal of respect for people who are so devoted to Judaism that they can adhere to these rules and regulations. So I don't mean to just totally make light of it, although I like to joke around, but I do have great respect for people who have the ability to do that. Like, for instance, I haven't eaten meat since I was about 12. And it involves quite a bit of discipline to do that, especially when you're a kid. And so I understand what it means to make a commitment, a moral commitment, and to stick with it and to cling to those beliefs. So I do have respect for people who do that. And I also agree with what you're saying about creating a space like 1 day a week, where you're gonna like shut yourself off from outside influences and have a spiritual day. I get all that, and I think it's a good thing. But I think it might make more sense if we just said, on this day, we're going to refrain from cars and we're going to cell phones, not because somebody's building a fire at its work, but we just want to be free of technology for a day or something like that. But I don't want to impose my views on the Orthodox. I do, like I say, I do have a lot of respect for fellow Jews who have the strength of their convictions and are willing to keep it. The only problem I have with it is I wanted you to be on our Shabbat video. I wanted you to participate in our Shabbat celebrations that we do by video, so I could let people hear your insights and your wisdom on Shabbat. But then you told me you couldn't do it even if it was recorded ahead of time, because it's going to be broadcast on Shabbat. So now everybody's missing out on you. But I can always tell them to watch you on Tuesday, and they can catch some of that.
That's how we build our audience, hopefully.
There you go. So let's leave it with that. We both have different ways of observing, and I do have, like I say, great respect for you and your convictions and the rationale behind it. to try to have a day that's carved out where you think about things other than the mundane. I think we've given food for thought for people. Somebody probably agrees with something that Rabbi Kahn and I said, and there's probably a bunch of people who disagree. So if there's anybody who would like to join in, this is your big chance. The last time I was really excited because Rabbi Kahn, for the first time, pointed out something that he found troubling about my beliefs and took a shot at my beliefs and challenged something that I was saying. And it's like, wow, finally we got a robust discussion going here. So if you agree with me, I'd like to hear from you. But if you disagree, I'd like to hear even more. So maybe someone out there can challenge some of my thoughts, which isn't too hard because usually they're a little bit off the beaten path. So anybody want to jump in, go right ahead with a question or a comment. Go ahead, Emily.
Go ahead, Emily.
Okay, this is, my feeling about the Sabbath is it's a time for spirituality and giving and loving and all that. All that being said, an internal combustion engine, even a Prius, starts with a spark from a spark plug that can be construed as a fire. A Tesla would have, if you want to carry it to that extreme, you're not supposed to plug things in and start. I grew up Orthodox, so I see Rabbi Kahn nodding his head. I know all those things you're not supposed to do. In this day and age, to me personally, it doesn't make any difference, but I see your argument. If you wanted to take it to the extreme, any creativity, creating heat, creating light was a no, 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 no. So if that's what you believe, fine. Personally, I'd rather believe it's a time for friendship and giving and loving and forget all the other stuff. But everybody's entitled to his or her own.
But a spark, even if there was a spark, which I'm not, I don't think so, but even if there was, it's not a fire. A fire, an ish, is a certain thing that has flames and all this other stuff. That stuff isn't happening. There's nothing like that. Well, also, like for instance, on the Sabbath, I do a lot of stuff with my family. So we have basketball games and I interact with my kids and we do stuff together. We have, based on being able to drive somewhere or whatever. So that's how I do it. But when we're in the basketball league in West Boca, we have some kids who are Orthodox, and so they're not able to play at certain times. So they told us that we're not allowed to have practice anymore on a Saturday. Just the entire league can't have practice anymore on a Saturday. And I didn't do it when I had kids who were Orthodox on my team. I'd find some other days to do it, but they have great respect. Oh, you'll appreciate this, Rabbi Kahn. So I'm coaching my team now in basketball, and my co-coach is from Israel. He's this black guy with dreadlocks, and he comes from Israel and he speaks some Hebrew. So I said to him, "We're going to teach all the kids how to say things in Hebrew, and the other team's going to be totally confused. They won't know what we're talking about."
That's great. That's awesome.
So we had I taught him some words. So we had our first game the other day. And we're called the Gators. So gator in Hebrew, alligator is tanin. So I taught them taninim. So I said, Echad, Shtayim, Shalosh. And we went, taninim, gators. We went running out of the field and they're looking at us like, who are these people? These people are crazy. And then we're teaching them like, Zehakadur. And then when I went around to everybody and I said, I taught them, Echorim Lecha. They say Korim Li Brandon or Korim Li Josh, whatever. So everybody's saying my name is in Hebrew. And so my wife said to me, "Are all these kids Jewish?" I said, "No." She says, "Well, don't you think maybe their parents wouldn't like them learning Hebrew?" I said, "Well, if they're Christian, I'm teaching them the language that Jesus spoke. How could they argue with that? I'm teaching them the language of the book that they consider to be God's word, Jewish scripture." So certainly they wouldn't mind that. And so the kids are learning Hebrew and they're kind of into it. We've just had one game, so they don't know that much, but I'm going to teach them like how to say full court press and pass and all this other stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so we're having a good time out there. All right, who else wants to jump in?
I'll just say one more thing. I remember watching a basketball game where there was a team playing Gallaudet. You know what Gallaudet is? The school for the deaf. and they all spoke in sign language, which really confused the other team.
Oh, there you go. That's pretty good. All right. Well, we got a lot of stuff going on in the world today also. There's all types of things going on with Cuomo, you know, and there's stuff going on with the $1.9 trillion that's going to be handed out to people getting checks. And also, I wanted to, I think your daughter's off the line. I don't see her on anymore. Rena?
Yeah.
I was going to
Yeah,
ask her.
Rena.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll ask you, Rabbi Khan, maybe you could deal with this one also. And we've spoken about this before, but how do you deal with people who are divided up under partisan lines, you know, and they're not talking to each other anymore and they're angry with each other? And it could be religious lines too. We have Jews like that too, who don't speak to fellow Jews because they're not the right brand of Judaism. Or also a lot of people get really mad over Israel. You know, like there's a lot of Jews who don't sufficiently support Israel to the satisfaction of others, and they get upset. So, I mean, the amount of division in this country, I've never seen it like this before. I've seen it pretty bad, but it's worse now than I've ever seen. If families and friends not talking to each other. So, do you have any thoughts about that, or does anybody else want to share some thoughts? Rabbi Khan,
I actually just asked my son to see if he could get Rena to come back on, because I'd love also to hear her perspective. She has told my wife and I that she is very disturbed by what's going on. I mean, she's on a college campus. It's a Jewish university, so you don't have the diversity of views that you would have of course, on a regular college campus. But she has told us that she's very disturbed by the degree of powerful feelings that are breaking up relationships. And here she is. I won't speak for her.
We got Rena back. All right, Rena, we're interested in tapping into your wisdom, since you're on a college campus surrounded by all these erudite people and ideas. Do you have any thoughts for us about this partisan divide and how we might be able to heal the divide?
Big question, big question. I think I said a little before, like it's obviously a big problem. Even take politics out of it, with any beliefs, any ways of thought. If some people get trapped in their own mindsets, and it's hard for them to even listen to someone who thinks differently at all. I don't know exactly how you would heal that. I know from being on a college campus, there's different clubs here that have very strong messages that people don't agree with, and sometimes people are like telling you things and people just walk away. They don't want to hear it. So you keep trying. If you feel strongly about something, you keep trying to say it. I think the problem is when it gets violent, obviously, or when you do anything that puts people in danger. I don't know, it's hard. I'm curious to see what the psychologist will tell you when you discuss with her.
Yeah, well, you know, I think what a big part of the problem is that many people are not getting the whole picture about things and are operating under facts that are just completely erroneous. Mm-hmm. And they're operating under these facts as if they're true, and it's like they're in a cult. If you deal with somebody in a cult and you say, hey, you know what, your guru or your cult leader, he's not such a great guy, they'll get really, really mad, because their beliefs aren't rationally held. It's an emotional belief, not based on reason, and they get really mad. And there's people who get really mad. And from what I've discovered in my experience, there's people who believe that those on the other side are like pure evil. And it's hard for them to even have a rational discussion with them, or even to think about them the same way. I know many people who say to me, any person who supports Trump is evil and they're deranged, and I can't have anything to do with them. I no longer respect them. I don't want to deal with them. I don't want to have anything to do with them anymore. I'm done. Because that's how they believe, that he represents things that they find so abhorrent that they can't even respect somebody. And I have people on the other side, people, you know, more conservative people, who look at someone who's a liberal and they say, these people are just pure evil. They're just doing things that are so horrible. They're going to let in every single immigrant. They're going to defund the police. They're going to destroy our economy to protect the environment. They have no sense of right or wrong. And these people are evil. And they only listen to certain things. And they form this belief system where they can't talk to the person. And we're getting trapped. Same thing in the religious divide. There's people like on the Orthodox side, who look at someone who doesn't take the Torah literally and think that these people are the greatest threat to Judaism in the world, and Judaism's everything to them. Like, I have people who have said really horrible, vile things to me based on the fact that I don't think God wrote the Torah. And they call me, you know, self-hating Jew is one of the milder things they call me, but it's a lot worse. They have it in for me more than they would a Christian or a Muslim who's saying bad things about Jews, because to them, I'm somebody attacking Judaism from the inside, who dares to call himself a rabbi and is teaching things that they consider heresy and dangerous. So they get really, really mad. And it's not just towards me, but they will get mad, some of the Orthodox, towards people who aren't Orthodox, whether they're a rabbi or not. And then you have some people on the Reform side or the progressive side who look at the Orthodox like, you know, these people are just completely out of touch with reality, just following rules that don't make sense anymore. And I think we're losing the capacity to, first of all, see the big picture, and to see like when I watch MSNBC, I think these people are brilliant, and I think they come up with some really amazing things, but they're also blind to certain other things. Like, there's certain things they never mention, and it's like they're giving you part of the picture. Like, I've never seen anybody in MSNBC ever say something good about Israel. It's like, you know, if you guys claim to believe in civil rights and liberal progressive ideas, you should be championing Israel all the time, especially compared to its neighbors, you know, and you should be concerned about Black Lives Matter that's saying things that are like bad against Jews, and you know, there's no balance there. And I think the solution to this problem is to be able to criticize your own approach and your own group, and to be able to find something good about the other group. Might be hard sometimes, but I think that's what we need to do. And people are losing the capacity to do it because we're like cult-like thinkers, where people are just blindly following one position and considering the other one totally evil. And it's very dangerous, especially for Jews, because we're a very small group of people. When we're fighting with each other and going after each other with such viciousness, there's no possible way that we could be a force for good in the world when we're too busy fighting each other. I'd be glad to hear from other people on this topic, because I think it's something that's very important. Go ahead, Harris.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
If you're a stone Orthodox Jew and you're drafted into service, how do you get off the hook?
Yeah, you know, Harris, we've had a lot of people trying to get out from having to listen to our service too. We've had people who, they come into a Friday night service and they're like, hey, I'm Orthodox, I don't have to deal with all this stuff, and they run for the hills. So that's a very, very good question. So go ahead, Rabbi.
I don't think he meant that service. I'm going to take the question, I'm going to take it in a little bit of a different direction. Harris, I'm glad you asked that question. I actually have some good friends who are Orthodox and very strict in their practice and their following of Jewish law. And they served in the forces. I also actually have a close relative who was a chaplain in the U.S. Army. And it's definitely a challenge. Finding sometimes it's also a challenge in terms of kosher food, but the Army, you know, tries to work with soldiers of different backgrounds. If a Muslim soldier says, I need halal food, and different people have different diets, it's easier to find food. The basic way it works is that anything that is a threat to life or a possible threat to life supersedes the Sabbath. So soldiers who are certainly in anywhere near the line of fire, anywhere near a battleground, it's a much different situation than it would be for soldiers who are in training and are not, you know, let's say here in the United States, where there's nothing actually threatening them, but they're training how to deal with situations that would be threatening. What I've heard from friends is that it depends on who your officers are. If your officers are going to be a little bit more understanding, then a lot of times they make rotations, and these guys were able to do what they needed to do in terms of observing Sabbath and Jewish holidays. Some officers are not understanding at all, and they say, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to know about it. You do whatever we tell you to do. And that's a more difficult situation for guys, Orthodox Jews in the service. But there's no doubt that things have come a long way than, let's say, it used to be. You know, my dad's generation, who was in the Second World War, it was a very different time period and a very different set of circumstances. And there was a lot less flexibility, I think, whereas nowadays in the United States Armed Forces, there are people from unbelievably diverse backgrounds, religiously and socially and culturally and geographically and every way. And a lot more flexibility exists in most cases to help people be successful during their years in the service and also maintain their, let's say, religious affiliation. So the guys that I know were able to make it work.
Thank you.
Rabbi Khan, I have another question I wanted to ask you. From my perspective, it's important that the Jewish people unite in order to accomplish Jewish ideals and the Jewish mission to improve the world. And I would say that to me, the way that we could do that would be to galvanize a transformation in religion to protect the planet, to get the religions of the world together to protect Earth, which is really a fundamental issue in Judaism. You know, protecting the earth and reverence for nature is a fundamental issue in Judaism. And I think if the biblical prophets and the people who were around during Torah times were alive today, and they could see what we're doing to the planet, I think that they would be outraged. And I think they would be screaming that we need to protect creation, which is the greatest evidence of a creator. And to destroy the beauty that God has created should be considered blasphemy. So to me, the Jewish people need to spearhead a spiritual transformation to protect this planet from ourselves. I also think that the Jewish people should work together in order to alleviate the massive suffering and poverty throughout the world. People who are just living under horrific circumstances, largely because women don't have reproductive freedom, largely because women don't have access to contraceptives and freedom over their own reproductive system, and they're just looked at like breeding cattle, and it just causes horrific problems. And I think we should also get together to try to do something about the ravaging violence from guns in this country. Just the level of violence and guns, and I mean, there's a lot of things that I think Jews should be working on together, but we never get around to these things because we're too busy fighting with each other over doctrinal issues or something else. I was just wondering, from your perspective as an Orthodox rabbi, and we point out, Rabbi Khan is not speaking for all Orthodox rabbis, and I'm not speaking for all anything. We're just sharing our opinion. So he's reflecting an Orthodox position, not the Orthodox position. But I would just like to get your perspective as an Orthodox rabbi. If the Jewish people one day got their act together, and now we're all working together, we're all united as a team, what is it that we should be doing in order to make this world a better place and to accomplish the mission of the Jewish people as a light to the nations? What would we do?
You know, I think fundamentally, one of the critical pieces from an Orthodox perspective is to unite the world around the idea of God. And once you build in that way, then the next step is to say human beings are all creatures of God, and therefore we should respect each other. Therefore, we should never harm each other. So I think that you can move if you, and then in addition to that, to speak to your point about the world and the environment, if you can kind of lay a foundation that says there's a God and God created the world and we're God's creatures, it potentially could bring a unity of mankind, but it could also, in addition, bring this idea that, wow, we live in a created world that we have to cherish, that we have to take care of, that we have to sustain, that we can't destroy, and we can't deal with the way that we're in many places in the world dealing with it. So I think that, I believe if you asked 1,000 people, 1,000 people would come up with obviously different central places to start from to then move out and move in that direction. So answering the question from my perspective and having studied a certain amount of traditional sources about this, I think that the traditional view in Judaism is to talk about start with a belief in God and then build from that, how that unites people, how that should unite people, how that means we shouldn't harm other people. There should be peace in the world. And then we should move in a direction of improving the world. What we the famous phrase in Hebrew, litaken olam, tikkun olam, improving the world, repairing the world, but working together to do that. Now, if you followed up and said to me, do I see any sign of that happening right now? I would say there's not a lot of signs of that happening, unfortunately, because the whole world is so fragmented and so divided in so many ways that it's hard to see how we would get there.
Well, let me ask you something, Rabbi Khan, because I happen to agree with you. That would be a good, in my opinion, the environmental crisis is so urgent that we don't really have time to wait around for everybody to believe the same thing about God. We need to get going. So, you know, waiting for that to happen is like waiting for the Messiah to come, if you'll pardon the expression. But to get to your point, is it not true that the traditional belief, the Orthodox belief, if you will, in God, actually does the opposite of what you're suggesting? Because what you're suggesting is the world needs to all gather together and unify around belief in God. But the Orthodox belief is, well, God is, he's got a certain name and he wrote a certain book and these are his rules. And so Christians say, no, you got it wrong. He had a kid. and if you don't accept the kid, you're going downstairs. And the Muslims are saying, no, you guys have it wrong. There's another revelation. Our view of God is the right one. We supersede you guys. And the Buddhists so your goal is not going to be achieved, in my opinion, through what Orthodox Judaism is doing. Because basically Orthodox Judaism is saying, this is God, here he is, he's in the Torah, this is it. So either everybody has to agree with that view or they're all going to have different views about God. Many of them are mutually contradictory. If that's the case, trying to unify everybody around this concept seems like it's not happening. Not only that, I would say that the concept of God is one of the most divisive features in the world. And if you wanted to unify everyone, maybe you should get rid of the whole concept completely and just say, forget about what we thought before. We have no clue. Let's just all work together and try to come up with something else and start from scratch. Because I think that these entrenched ideas that we have, especially when you say, God wrote my book. And then somebody else says, no, God wrote my book. And then when you say, well, how do you know? And you say, well, I have faith. And then somebody says, well, I have faith in my view. See, to me, what would actually unify people is if we use a scientific approach and said, hey, you know what? Let's look at all the religions rationally and scientifically. Let's apply logic to all of them. And then we have a unifying basis. We have a basis of agreement where we can start then questioning things and looking at things. Like scientists, they don't all agree on things. Some of them have different theories about things, but they're all working together and they're all unified because they agree on the process. And they say, let's use this process and then let's see what we can figure out. So I know that's kind of a broad side about what you were saying, but I would be curious to see how you would respond to that.
Well, several people put up their hands, so I want to be brief.
All right.
I'll be very brief, especially because we don't have all that much time left.
Right.
I would say that your point is very, very well taken. And the idea that the entire world will reach a point of not only believing in God, but believing in the Jewish concept of God is one which, it's true, we connect with the Messianic era. We don't kind of connect that to something that's going to happen naturally and easily and smoothly without any problem. So your point is extremely well taken. And I would just add one other thing, and that is that I personally think in every situation, if groups of people are talking about working together, it would be totally, it would not be a good idea. It would be counterproductive to say, we can't talk about working together until all of us share the same belief system about God. Rather than do that, we should say, hey, if there's a good cause to work for, and you mentioned a list of about 10 excellent causes, if there's a good cause to work for and a group of people wants to work towards that cause, work towards the cause. And if by coming together, then they begin to share other, commonalities and get more people to join them, then you're moving in the right direction. So I would never, ever advocate for saying until we all believe in God or all believe in the same Jewish God, we shouldn't work together. We absolutely have to work together as human beings. And I know that's where you're coming from.
Yeah. Okay. Let's hear from some others. Who else?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Harris.
And then
a
Wendy.
question. Well, here's the situation. In the city I worked at, we have National Prayer Day every year. I don't know if you ever heard of that or not.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
And we have all these clergies in there, and we have a Reform rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, and the Orthodox rabbi and Reform rabbi never said one word to each other.
Yeah,
They
right.
sat with people of other faiths, and didn't say one word to each other. So I thought that was kind of strange, but I guess that's the way it is.
No, that is the way it is. And also, like I was saying to you, Rabbi Khan, the concept of God can't even unite Jewish people. It even divides up Jewish people. And what he's saying is true. Most Orthodox rabbis have nothing to do with me. You know, I've been trying to get them in dialogue. They've certainly never invited me to their synagogue to say anything, nor would they ever show up in my synagogue to say anything. So it's very divisive. And the whole concept of God, which is supposed to be a unifying concept, is dividing people. I think if we just said God is a creative power in the universe that caused a singularity to expand into the entire cosmos and caused us to go from 1 cell to 100 trillion, and it's a creative power that's wondrous and numinous and transcendent. If we just said that and that was it, I bet you everybody in the world could unify about that, because it's based on truth and fact and logic and reason. And if we just said that, that would be a unifying concept. But once you start saying, well, he wrote this book and he had this kid and he does this, it's just very, very divisive. Anybody else?
Yes, there was
Wendy.
Wendy. Wendy, unmute yourself, please. And then Valerie or Mishka. I'm not sure which.
Hopefully both.
All right.
Yeah.
A couple things. Comments about after I've said all of them. Way back, the rabbi said,
Wendy, we're
you know,
having
this
some
is
trouble
an
with your
issue,
audio.
That is an issue, you know,
I can
climate
hear.
change and the
Now I can hear.
you can hear, you can't.
Now I can. Go ahead.
Now you should be able to. Just so
Okay.
you know, the reason that can be done is has to do with Zoom and. All right, Sharon apparently can't. Anyway, the point is, you're talking about all these different issues. When we originally built cars and whatever we started with the electricity, all the things that were modern in the 30s, 40s, 50s, all those things that we gradually did that made things for more modern conveniences. We didn't realize that at the time we're going to cause all these other things so many years later. You talk about such a barrage of issues to cover. Meantime, presently, you know, and you're talking about women's issues, which are major issues. You talk about homelessness. You talk about people, you know, unemployment. You know, you talk about, you think of the pandemic. You can't deal with all of those issues in the same capacity now while the pandemic is going on. Different organizations will sooner fund one thing or the other. That's one thing. The other thing is you're saying about religion and being logic, etc. Wasn't religion, quote unquote?
Did you send it?
Can you guys understand Wendy?
No.
Wendy, we can't understand you. The volume is bad. Connection is bad. I'm sorry.
I think she was asking about religion and logic. And sadly, religion has been irrational and illogical for a very, very long time. And as long as that happens, it's going to be a very negative, divisive.
Oh, but do you
dangerous
understand
force.
what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm saying about
No.
faith? That way back when faith, when people started having religion, a lot of, first of all, people like to be part of groups. And
Yeah.
you can't be part of a group that has 40, be part of a group with 60 or 80 million people, but you don't want to be, I personally never wanted to be in a temple that had more than 400 or 500 people.
Yeah, I
You
agree.
don't want to be in an overwhelming group, because then you're not a part where you might make a difference.
Let me respond to what
Anybody
you're
getting what I'm
saying,
saying?
Wendy. Let me respond to what you're saying, because it's hard to hear you, but I think I got a little bit of it.
Is anybody
By the way,
hearing me?
yeah, by the way, Groucho Marx said, I would never want to belong to a club that would have someone like me as a member. So I hear what you're saying about being Jewish. You know, faith is overrated. Having faith is not it can be good, but it can be extremely harmful and dangerous. The people that flew planes into the buildings in New York had great faith, and it was based on a faith in God, that they had a holy mission, and it's very dangerous. The people that killed Jews in the Crusades and the Inquisition had great faith, and if it's not grounded in reason, it's extremely dangerous. And if you fall in love with someone and all your friends say this person's no good, but you have faith that that's a good person without any basis in reason and logic, you're going to make a huge mistake that they can see and you can't. Blind faith is extremely dangerous, but it's overrated. So if faith is only good when it's grounded in reason, logic, and compassion. I'm going to give you an example very quickly. Albert Einstein had faith in E equals mc squared, the theory of relativity, but he grounded it in reason. So in 1919, they finally tested it. There was an eclipse, and they did a test, and they found out the light actually was bent, and that gravity wasn't like Newton thought. It was actually a curvature of space, and it was confirmed. So he had faith, but it was grounded in reason, and he tested it to see if it was right. If you have blind faith without logic, you're like a loose cannon. And so we can't have faith without reason unless we want to live in a very, very dangerous world, which is exactly what we have. As far as Judaism not being able to tackle all these issues, of course it can. Judaism has the capacity to help spearhead the environmental movement, the gun control movement, the women's rights movement, every movement, because there's a lot of us around and we can all tackle different issues. So we can absolutely do it all. We just have to get together and make it happen. Now I want to hear from Valerie and Mishka. Go ahead. What do you guys want to say?
I forgot what I was going to say. No, one thing I'll say, I know my husband has a very good question, but coming from an Orthodox background, as you know, I went from the Orthodox to the conservative, to the Reform, to the leave it alone, coming back to the spaceships now. But I just did the opposite of Carol. She went this way and I went that way. But what I found a few weeks ago, and what I said too, I find that religion in its current status, even going back hundreds and hundreds of years, as an instrument of unification, has now become an instrument of division, not only amongst the Jews, but amongst others. And Wendy had a point. When you're dealing with masses of people, you cannot get to the root of the issues. You cannot get to the heart or the foundation of these religions. For example, you know, the Catholic religion was a political move by Constantine, but you can't tell that to any Christian. But it was a political move to unify the Holy Roman Empire and get rid of the gods and goddesses. That's the foundation. And the Gnostic text, which told the entire story, was cherry picked until they got it down to, and they pared it down to the point of where it made it politically gratifying and it served its purpose. That was the foundation. But when you're dealing with millions and millions and millions of people, it's very hard to educate people, you know, to what is the actual foundation of a religion. I think Judaism in many instances, because of all its machinations and different opinions and versions, that too has become somewhat muddied as well. I mean, one, you say there's 4 books of Moses. You said there's 5 books of Moses. Abraham was the first Jew. Abraham wasn't the first Jew. Hanukkah is 8 days with the oil. Then it wasn't 8 days because they were fighting. I mean, there's so much division even about the foundations that I could see where the conflicts come in, and how the heck are we supposed to overcome that? In my opinion, education. Take the religion out of it and educate people so that they learn how to think. That's all I have to say.
It's very simple to overcome all of it. And you can't take religion out of Judaism. That's like taking
No, I
you
said
out of
take
the United
religion out of
States.
education. No, I didn't say take religion out of Judaism. I said you could overcome a lot of these things and understand the foundations of your belief systems with education, and that's what is so difficult.
Let me just share with everybody that once you ground your beliefs in reason, then you're not going to have people saying, well, the oil lasted for 8 days and this happened and this happened. These are all beliefs based on blind faith with no evidence. As long as you believe things without evidence and reason, you're going to have a million different beliefs and they're all going to be incompatible, and there's not going to be any way to resolve it because they're just believing nonsense.
I think we're saying the same thing, but I think we're both saying the same thing. You're saying reason, and I'm interpreting your version of reason with education.
Yes, but there's a lot of education.
You have to have a combination.
There's a lot of education that's miseducation. They're educating people to believe nonsense. They're educating people to have blind faith in nonsense. You have to start by grounding your beliefs in reason and logic and science. And then you can have a basis for belief. And to say that, well, we can't get a lot of people together, we absolutely can. The Jewish people have mobilized. We led a massive movement for civil rights with Martin Luther King in the 60s. We've led movements all over history. Millions of people have been galvanized by religion. And as a Jew who's optimistic about the potential of Judaism, I will say that Judaism can absolutely bring people together for a good cause. And I think it will, as soon as we ground our beliefs in reason. Then we could get together and do all types of great things.
And Mishka had a really good question.
Go ahead, Mishka.
Well, I kind of forgot it. No. As most of you know, I'm a university professor, and the courses I teach are in political science, constitutional law, international law, and so on. Whenever a new president comes in, we have to change certain materials because obviously comparing Trump and Biden, everybody would understand that the views and beliefs would be vastly different. One of the issues that we're facing now, universities get federal money, a lot of it, not just for sport teams, but also for in other areas, education. There is an issue coming forth. I have been assigned a number of courses in which I have to change the view of transgender people. And that's kind of difficult, you know, from male to female, female to male. However, during the Obama administration, there was an attempt to state that these were still people. And the Constitution says, we the people. Now, however, the current administration has a law, I think it's in process, that will mandate that transgenders be treated in the current sex. I just wonder, you know, if anybody has any suggestions for how I do this.
It's very interesting how that would apply religiously too. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're born, no, go ahead.
So you mean instead of he or she, to just refer to them as they?
No.
They're actually forming a third, want to form a third gender,
Right.
because they want to form a third gender is what he's saying also. Because you don't change your DNA. I mean, you could change your physicality, but your DNA doesn't change. So even if you want to be recognized as a male, if you were born a female, you might outwardly change that. You might believe you are, you might look like that, but genetically you're not. And I know the problem he's having is that you're not allowed to change your birth certificate. You're not allowed to change your passport with regard to genders. So there's a political conflict there, as well as I'm sure may possibly a religious perspective as well.
The traditional religion has held that you have two genders and that they should procreate together, and homosexuals should be stoned to death.
Yes.
So traditional religion has been very hostile towards recognizing certain things that modern science and psychologists are starting to figure out. So if you take a traditional view, none of these things are going to work. It's going to be very hostile and people could be stoned to death or whatever. The only way to deal with it would be to try to take Jewish ideals and principles, equality, fairness, justice, compassion, and use those to guide you instead of a literal interpretation of what the Torah is saying. And then all these issues will sort themselves out.
No. I'm sorry, Rabbi. When you get federal money from the government, whoever is in whatever party is in charge, put it this way, there are mandatory requirements that go with it. The Biden administration wants to move the transgender people, who, by the way, thousands have served in the military as transgenders. And the issue apparently is, in view of the fact that the Biden administration wants to add this as an additional gender, how do people feel about that? I just like some ideas.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. That whatever feelings we have on it should be guided by Jewish ideals of justice, fairness, of equality, and compassion. And when we use these ideals, then we can have a discussion about how to handle this in a rational way. If we view it by saying, well, the Bible says, and then go from there, we're going to be in trouble. So what I'm saying is any issue should be guided by Jewish ideals rather than a literal view of the Torah, and then we can come up with a solution to it, to anything. Yeah, Emily.
Unmute yourself, Emily.
Kind of agree with Misha that I think this has to be, we can individually feel certain ways about these issues, but it has to be almost legislated. The same as when you fill something out, a birth certificate, and it asks for religion, you can choose not to answer. Race, you can choose not to answer. Perhaps gender, we should choose not to answer. And if that becomes common practice, then we are all humans.
But that raises a lot of issues, because then you have insurance companies for medical issues. And this is a big issue as well, because you know, you have medical issues, women have certain problems, men have certain problems.
Yeah,
Obviously,
you're right.
So I mean, I understand from that's why I was asking from a religious perspective. That's one way of looking at it. But the realistic thing from a secular level, and from, you know, it is really a massive issue to really try to overcome or organize or work with or understand and come to some kind of accommodations with it. You know, he's not getting federal money in a school because they're not going to have a bathroom that says transgender. It's man and woman and whatever.
We have to realize that the government,
man, woman, and whatever. And does the whatever, is that a female trans to male, or is it male trans to female, or do you have to have 4 bathrooms? And you're talking about federal money, so you got the government involved with all of this. It's not just a religious
have one unisex bathroom,
as well as personal opinions. I mean, it's
the
very
way
difficult.
dorms are now
and we're not talking about home.
The government enacts laws based on the morality of the times and the consensus of the people. And the morality and the consensus of the people is shaped in large part by religious ideas. In the 1800s, people said that the Bible supported slavery because it said that the children of Noah, Ham, should serve the others. And the Bible is used to support slavery. The Bible is used to support women not having the right to vote, because in Christian scripture, it said a woman should not be heard unless her husband gives her permission to speak. So when you talk about legislation, legislation is not made in a vacuum. Legislation is based on where society is these days And where it is these days is based largely on religious and spiritual influences. And that's why I say again, the Jewish focus on equality, justice, fairness, and compassion, if we use these ideals to guide us, we'll probably come up with a much better solution than if we say, well, my Bible from 3,000 years ago says this. I'm not really sure why anybody would disagree that we should be guided by Jewish ideals of compassion, fairness, equality, and justice. But if there are people who think these things are irrelevant, I'm glad to hear from them. But as a Jew, I think that these ideals should guide us. Go ahead, Paul. What would you like to share?
This brings up something related to what we were discussing earlier with respect to the divisiveness in society today. And I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate in suggesting that for those of us that grew up in the late 60s and came of age in the early 70s, the divisiveness back then was as bad, if not worse, than what it is today. The one side thought the other side was totally crazy, and there was no talking between the two sides. And that was a time of civil rights, women's rights movement, gay rights movement, and the language that we're talking about right now on this one issue of gender is very similar to the kinds of language that was used back in the early 70s with respect to the gay rights movement. Very, very similar. And somehow I'm convinced that somehow we work these things out. And I think the work of Steven Pinker talks about how things are getting better. We really are getting better. Despite whatever we think, things are going to hell in a handbasket. And I think that, we talk about universal income, gender, whatever. These things somehow we make out. And I have only one other comment, and that has to do with the issue of religion. And I think, I agree with you, Rabbi Silver. There's a problem in that my opinion with respect to agreement is predicated on my own level of education and understanding. I know that many members of my own family just can't get there. It's too much of a jump. It's too heavy of a lift to get to where you and I are on this stuff. Yeah. And to demand it of them is irresponsible of us.
Yeah, I agree with you. By the way, I don't think you're advocating the devil. I think you were advocating goodness and kindness. Anyway, I think it's time to sign off. Rabbi Kahn has to go. It's been a great discussion. We've been on for a little while. Wendy, if you want to make a concluding comment, go right ahead and we'll call it a day. Go ahead.
I'm on my phone, so hopefully you can hear me. In answer to the bathroom thing, why can't there be a handicap bathroom that has a door and that be for the handicapped and the transgender? There's only one person in that room at a time.
Wendy, you solved the problem, but we can't call it handicap. That's politically incorrect. We'd have to call it differently gendered. All right, thank you, everybody. Great to be with you. Thanks, Rabbi Kahn and your family, and thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Great to be